Hello, thank you so much to Marion and the team at NATE Scotland for inviting me to come talk to you today. My name is Jodee Simpson and I am an autistic speech language therapist, and I'm also the co-founder of the Neurodivergent Speech and Language Therapy Network. And we now have 350 members, but in my former career I was actually a French teacher. Our journeys into activism often start with our stories. And my story starts like the duck in this image, knowing that I was different but feeling disordered, hitting rock bottom, but also having a few light bulb moments. One of my light bulb moments was at the RCSLT conference last year, listening to other diversity groups talking and realising that we all had one thing in common. We were grouped at different intersections on the margins, but we all lacked a sense of belonging within our profession. We all have intersecting identities that influence how we see, understand, and interact with the world. I am an autistic speech and language therapist with ADHD and complex PTSD. I grew up in poverty and I would consider myself as neuroqueer. I was bottom of the class in primary school and didn't read fluently till I was a teenager. But the assumptions of not being very clever that go with the label of special educational needs failed to recognise that I actually had an IQ in the superior range on the 97th percentile, which I didn't discover until my second degree doing speech and language therapy at the age of 38, and it came as a massive surprise to me. But I created this image just to communicate my perspective on the world. My head is always buzzing, it notices details and it doesn't filter out any of it. It's constantly thinking, analysing and finding wonderful patterns in the most unlikely places. And these details make my brain light up and it glows with the hum of joyful activity, just like in this image. But on a bad day, I spiral and I feel completely overwhelmed by my environment. I may be triggered and the PTSD is really overwhelming. So why am I telling you this? Because actually my story is really similar to many of my peers. I've lost count of the number of people whose reasons for joining our group was a feeling of actually not fitting into the profession and feeling isolated and lacking support. So we polled the group back in the early days and we asked them if they had left a job or were considering leaving their current role because of unmet neurodivergent needs. And we were really, really shocked to hear that 88% were in that position and 93% of students had already considered leaving their course, and that's absolutely shocking. But what's worse is that 40% of our members had either downgraded their role already or were considered downgrading their role or the number of hours that they were working. And there's a few that have even downgraded to unqualified roles and are now working as assistants but doing the same job that a speech and language therapy does but without the pay. So what does this look like for our group members? Many of them lack awareness, and that's partly due to late diagnosis. We've never given ourselves permission to explore what our neurodivergent needs are because we've always seen ourselves as underperforming and have been labelled so. So consequently, it makes us much more afraid to disclose our differences because we've always been told that we're not good enough. Many people are really sceptical of going to see occupational health because we are very worried that our fitness to practice is going to be challenged and questioned if we state that we have needs in the areas of executive functioning, because these are actually quite closely tied to our professionalism and to the standards of proficiency that we have to attain to carry out our roles as speech and language therapists. So even when people do have the courage to ask, the reasonable adjustments are really hard to obtain, and quite often are labelled as unfair. So even if they do obtain them, they've got this sense of, like, I've got this adjustment and everybody thinks it's unfair. So it isolates and alienates neurodivergent employees. And that will be one of the reasons why it's really hard to stay in a job and to feel like you belong in this profession. And of course, long term, that has a massive impact on our mental health. What I love about our group, our peer support group, is that it's a grassroots network. That's why when we first approached the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists, RCSLT, we insisted that the guidelines needed to be written entirely by neurodivergent SLTs. There was very little research in this area, so what did we do? We went to the group, hitting the microphone. We went to the group, to our group, and we asked them what was working well and what wasn't working for them, and what the issues were. In the end, we had 16 co-authors, but actually all of the content was crowdsourced, and it meant that there were many more people that could actually be involved in ways that were much more accessible for them, to their mental health or their energy levels, what we call spoons, the number of spoons that they have. We wanted to foster a collaborative community where there were no judgments or shame if a co-author's mental health, physical health or burnout meant that they needed to pass on the baton to another co-author. We are trying to find different ways to work as a community. We do body doubling in our committee because we recognise that actually we don't always have the energy to be able to commit to things, even though we really want to. But using our online forum on Facebook has been a brilliant way to share our learning together, and it's had a really positive impact on our group. Here's a few of the things. So here's some of the things that people have said about our group. One thing that I've heard from several people is that this group has completely and quite literally changed my life. People have a real sense of pride in their identity, and that's giving them more confidence to disclose their differences and say, you know, I have ADHD, I'm autistic, let's do something about that. People are actually feeling much more empowered to challenge the perceptions about themselves and reframe the narratives about how they see themselves. We have a sense of belonging and validation, and that when we're struggling, we're not struggling alone, we're struggling together. And that gives people that real sense of belonging, that we're part of something bigger. And I love this quote the best: we are enough as we are, and people need to stop telling us otherwise. I think that's pretty good. When we wrote the guidelines, we had three things in mind. We wanted to give people an opportunity to explore their own identity, to understand what their own needs were, what their own strengths were. But we also recognised that we needed to add adjustments, reasonable adjustments in there, and strategies and little hacks that people could use to help them in the workplace and help them to thrive. And the third section was really aimed at educating managers so that they can understand about neurotypical privilege, about intersectionality, about power and privilege, and about difference and accepting people as different rather than disordered or with a bunch of difficulties. Because that's the way that the medical model works. Even the social model lists people as having impairments, but we want people to understand their strengths, because that's what gives them courage to disclose, in knowing that actually they are worth something. So I always encourage people to download the guidelines off the website, and you can print it if that's easier. Get a highlighter out, go through the needs and strengths section and literally just highlight it, see what resonates with you. I'd encourage you to think about doing this with the whole team, because actually there are things in there that are everyday solutions, like accessibility tools, that will benefit everybody in our departments where we work. So it's about making things easier, it's about making the environments inclusive. So this document isn't just for neurodivergent people, it's designed to help employers understand how to make their workplaces inclusive on a really, really practical level. So we get quite a lot of managers contacting the network and asking us about, what do I do? I suspect that this employee may be neurodivergent. I don't know how to have that discussion with them. It's a tricky one. We actually asked the members of our peer support group their opinion on this, and most of them actually said, you know, I wish somebody had told me sooner, because most of us are late diagnosed and we've spent our whole lives feeling different, knowing that we're different, but not having the support that we needed, or not being able to give ourselves permission to explore our differences and accept them and own them as something positive. So I say the same thing to any manager that comes to me, is actually go and use these guidelines. It doesn't matter whether that person's neurodivergent or not. They will actually have to come to that conclusion on their own. But if you use this document with the whole team, and the whole team maps out their own differences in the way that they work, their productivity, then actually maybe we can start to be really inclusive, and maybe we can start to look at things we can do for a whole team instead of just for individuals in a team. So what's next for our group? Well, I'm really excited to announce that I have just started a Master of Research. I'm going to be doing research about us, about our group, about members of our group, and it's for us. And it's part of my journey and part of my activism journey to support my peers. And that's, supporting peers is so important, and that's why in our group, in the Facebook group, we talk a lot about reframing the narratives about ourselves. We talk about ableism, we talk about weaponized professionalism. We're trying to educate each other and build each other up. And I love that people go online and they share their experiences, and others call out the discrimination, they call out the ableism, and encourage each other to rethink how they see themselves, which is really exciting, and it's really beautiful to see the members growing like that and becoming more confident and owning their needs. I talk about owning my needs a lot, and that's my little act of defiance, that I'm angry about some of my needs not being accepted. So I'm now putting my foot down and owning them. I have a book coming out in November. It's not just my book, there's 20 authors that have all written about their experiences of being disabled speech language therapists, so that's something to look out for. And just, we're really committed to being curious and to keep growing. I invite you all to join us in making our workplaces more inclusive through small acts of allyship. For me, it's acts of activism. And this is really about normalising difference and normalising the tools that different learning styles needs. So it could be having an accessibility statement on your email signature. Set out what your communication preferences are. Let's call them communication preferences, not communication needs, because we all have communication preferences. Let's all put those on our emails. Let's think about desk lamps. I was recommended one by Occupational Health, but what's the point of one desk lamp when everybody else has got to sit in the dark? Let's get them for the whole office if you've got one person in that office who actually really needs it, because actually a lot of people will still benefit from it anyway. Let's think about educating the whole team. I'd encourage you, download the guidelines, learn about differences, learn about everyone's differences in their executive functioning and what your preferences are, what your strengths are. And let's normalise talking about these things so it takes away the stigma and the shame, because actually that's what it boils down to, is shame. And that's why we feel like we're not enough. Let's normalise the use of accessibility tools, because actually everybody benefits from them. Then nobody can say, well, it's not fair, because actually then we've all got some tools like dictate function that's on Word, or making sure we have a really good agenda that's really clear and in advance. And then using fidgets. I take a huge bag of fidget tools, you can't see them, whenever I go to training, and also when I go to team meetings, because I felt ashamed of people looking at me with a stress ball thinking that I was really anxious, when actually this was actually one of my productivity tools that was actually making me be able to contribute better. But it was just all they could see was my anxiety. But actually when we're all using them, we all benefit, we all realise actually these do help, they help us to concentrate. So, final closing thoughts about inclusive leadership. Let's be curious about difference. Let's foster psychological safety so that people are not afraid to be different, where we can celebrate differences. Let's learn about intersectionality, ableism, colonialism, and the role of power and privilege. Let's create a sense of belonging for everyone. Let's commit to growing and learning as an ally with small acts of allyship or activism. Thank you very much for listening. It's been wonderful being here. So I've added our website details on here, and also my own Linktree website, so that you can have a look at my mental health blog if you want. We've also got loads of resources on our website, and you can find that here. So I've just added a few books here that have been really impactful for me and really helped me to grow and develop that psychological safety and understand difference, understand myself. Plus the book that's coming out too, that's there. Thank you so much for having me today. It's been wonderful. If you want to ask any questions, you can contact me at the network or on social media. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to come and talk to you today. Bye.